Welcome to tonight's steering committee meeting. I can kind of skip over some of that. As a reminder, the ultimate goal for us here is to help limit the total rounds of revisions that are required for the draft zoning code updates. This is before they're ready for public input and for the town board final approval. So our aim really is to streamline the process and help us stay on budget. So tonight, the summary of what we're going to do is review the first two batches of recommended updates. And we need to make sure these are aligned with the comprehensive plan vision statement, the goals and objectives. At the end of the meeting, we'll touch base on the timeline, and we will also have public input. Yeah, we're going to review the timeline for public input and town board review. So I am going to pause there because I'm realizing, even though we're not live to YouTube, if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much for being here and following along with us. We see you. We really appreciate it. Just had to take a little moment to pause, make sure I got that in. Okay, so leading up to tonight's meeting, the full town board, and as well as the group here, you all reviewed these recommendations. They were shared with us from Valerie and her team at NPV. Tony Gonsalves and Mary Shaw specifically asked me over email to relay their gratitude to this group and to the entire Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee for all the work that has been accomplished so far. So I wanted to make sure I pass that gratitude along. So we all understand we're reviewing tonight with an eye towards two things. So one, we need to be consistent with the draft vision statement, goals and objectives. And then two, we want to make sure that we're thinking about practical implementation and efficiency. So this subcommittee includes the various boards and councils that implement the code on an ongoing basis. We've also got the town planner here, and shortly we should have the planning board attorney. Oh, he's here. Planning board attorney will be joining us as well. We expect that this committee will be able to make suggestions and ask questions that will help NPV further refine their recommendations. So, okay, let's focus on tonight's agenda. I do want to highlight again, and I know I do this every time, but the changes that NPV has proposed to the zoning code, those are based on and grounded in the public input and feedback that NPV has collected during round one and round two of the public workshops and surveys. It's also based on their experience working in the field and what they see as best practices for towns similar size, similar geography, et cetera, to Lewisboro. So each of the changes is directly related to one of the draft goals and objectives for the comprehensive plan, and we're going to make sure to highlight that as we go through each document. Importantly, some of the proposed changes from NPV would require a policy decision, and we all know and appreciate that the town board is the ultimate authority there. So it's really great that we've collected comments from the town board and that Andrea and Dan are here, as well as Judd and Jan. And as a result, I think we have a great framework to have a really productive discussion, figure out what feels most comfortable for the group as we are here and what the town board might like to see based on their comments. And then we can work towards our goal of streamlining the process and limiting the total round of revisions and stay on budget by presenting the public and the town board with a draft that reflects the feedback and the comments from everybody involved in the process. So thank you so much to everybody for, Thank you so much to everybody for all the work you've been doing behind the scenes. I know we have a lot to get through tonight, so I am going to be watching the clock really closely. Make sure we keep things moving along. If I stop you in the middle of a comment or ask you to hold your comment to a different section, please know it's nothing personal. And please do make a note of any questions that go unanswered and follow up with me over email after the meeting. Thank you so much. Okay, so with that, I am going to share my screen. And I think that we should, in the interest of time, just dive right in. So I'm going to lead the meeting. That way Valerie is freed up to take notes, answer all the questions, etc. So I think we're gonna dive right into the first batch of documents, which we reviewed at last month's meeting. So this batch of documents represents the feedback that was collected at that last meeting. And then some of the feedback that's been collected in the interim, I noticed that Valerie was going in and where there were typos or things that were spaces, indentation, grammar, no-brainer kind of stuff, she went ahead and fixed that behind the scenes. So that way we can just keep looking at a cleaner and cleaner draft. But with regards to the steep slopes, specifically this document, I do want to pass the mic to Valerie and Jan, just to give us the big picture context. So how these new proposed chapters came out of last month's discussion and how they're different from what is currently in the Lewisboro Town Code. So Valerie, I'll hand that to you to start.
Sure. So after last month's discussion, I think there was concern that right now the zoning does not really regulate steep slopes. And so there was some concern about developing steep slopes protections. And originally we put forth maybe some provisions to put into the zoning code. But I think after further discussion, it was decided that we should develop a standalone steep slopes protection law. And that's what you have for you this evening. It's a law that basically incorporates a number of best practices. That being said, it is really there as a framework to start the discussion and to basically get feedback from the town as to edits or amendments that you'd like to see as part of any proposed steep slopes protection law that goes to the town board. So if you want, Katie, we can go through the comments that we received. I went through and took care of, like, as Katie mentioned, some of the really no-brainer, easy comments that need to be addressed. And then other ones I thought would probably be worth having a more substantive discussion with the committee.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Before we jump into the document, anything big picture, Jan, that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add that the current code provides no regulation of steep slopes. There's some aspirational statements in the zoning code that steep slopes should be preserved, but they have no teeth. So I do see a lot of cases where the planning board's only seeing on the residential side applications for wetland permits. So there's a lot of steep slope disturbance that occurs through the course of building permits and just people able to grade their property without any oversight whatsoever. So I think it is important to have some steep slope provisions, and it would be consistent with most of the municipalities around you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then also I just want to point out that goal and objective 7.1, that's what this is all tied back to: review, clarify, and strengthen where necessary wetlands and water courses, wetlands and steep slopes. And then it's also related to reviewing and strengthening where necessary enforcement mechanisms for local environmental codes. And I think, am I missing anything else, Valerie?
I don't have that.
Okay, no problem.
In front of me, so I did not memorize it. I apologize, but I think you captured most of them.
Those are the big ones. Okay, so let me just go to the actual steep slopes document. So we're going to do this the same way we did last month. We're just going to go through the document and look at all of the comments. So I'm going to make your faces small so I won't be able to see you if you're visually raising your hand. So please use the raise hand button on Zoom. John, do you have a general comment, or just if we have something on specific text, let's wait till we get into it.
Just if we're taking the steep slopes out of the zoning, but we still want them attached to the comprehensive plan, we're going to have to put a section in the plan that refers to whatever code we want to do, or gives the board, direction to do that. That's my.
No, you don't necessarily have to, because we talk about steep slopes protections, right? So it's all consistent with the comprehensive plan. You don't have to specifically identify each and every subsection of your town code. It's all about amending your town code. There are a number of other actual chapters we're talking about tonight that aren't going to be in your zoning as well, and are part of the comprehensive plan.
This could live in the zoning code though, couldn't it, Valerie? Or you want to do
You
a
could if
separate
you'd like
chapter?
to. Yeah, if you
Yeah.
prefer that as well.
Hold on, I just need to. Closed captioning is now turned on. Hold on one second. I got a text from one of my helpers at the town office that I just need to make sure that I enable captions.
So John, just to make sure, and I think this is important in general, because you're going to be getting the draft comprehensive plan soon. So the draft comprehensive plan provides guidance, right? And it provides, you know, there is some explanation as to what the guidance refers to, but it's not all exhaustive. So it doesn't identify absolutely every possible town code, town policy, you know, town project that a particular recommendation could be consistent with, or could ultimately end up implementing that particular goal and recommendation.
Yeah, I just think that the ones that we feel really important, and I think steep slope is one of them, should be kind of highlighted. You know, I'm sure there'll be a bunch of others of less significance. So that's
It
just,
is highlighted in your code. I mean, in the comprehensive plan. It is
It's one of the goals and objectives
Right.
that I just highlighted. Okay, Charlene, general, or okay, let's go. Let's get into the document. Okay. So. Oh,
you're in the
now I'm in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Sorry. All right, let me just take a deep breath. I think I've got the captions thing figured out. I'm not good at being the host and the administrator. All right, we're good. We got it. So here's the document. I'm just gonna scroll through to our first comment. Okay, so this is just related to this first section here. And this is kind of how I'm going to do things. If I haven't seen like a lot of responses in something, then we can have a quick discussion about it. Would anybody have a problem adding something like regulation? This is like a clarification point for why this regulation would exist. It can also protect other properties upslope or downslope. Is that okay with everybody? The reason why we have the code? Okay. Did you? Okay, you were just saying thumbs up. Okay. Next. Okay, so I think this question from Andrea, I also want to highlight, this ties to a question from Jan that was later in the document, just about still wondering about whether we need something greater than 35% as well, or if 2 categories would be sufficient. So Andrea, do you want to add any context or ask a follow-up question here?
No, I was just curious as to where we get these guidelines, how we came up with them, where they come from, are they based on an average, you know, other codes within the county? I was just curious as to the.
So, I mean, a lot of steep slopes regulations have these 3 different categories. That being said, typically, you know, 15% or above is considered a steep slope. So the town can regulate however many categories you would like to regulate. I mean, you could just regulate 15% or more, or you could specifically call out the moderately steep slope, very steep slopes, or extremely steep slopes. So that's really up to the town how you would like to at this point. So I know
that was the answer to my question, is that there's generally 3 subsections that codes deal with. That nobody pulled this out of thin air. What I'm saying is this is like a standard. That's all.
Right, yes, it is. I'm going to say it's best practices, but not necessarily a specific standard. Because somebody could easily look at another community and say, hey, they only use 2 categories, or they regulate everything above 15% or above 25%. But there are a number of other communities that have the three different levels, and we decided to go with that as a potential for the town. Again, we're open to suggestions from the town.
Thank you.
Anything to add to that, Jan? And also, I just want to also highlight, maybe if we expand this 10 feet number to your comment, if there's a number you had in mind that would be better.
I think either increasing the number or adding, you know, a square footage to qualify that. You know, oftentimes most projects will have a steep slopes map, you know, shading all steep slopes, and oftentimes you'll find these little bands, narrow bands that might hit, say, the 35% threshold, and it's shaded 35%, but it's a very small area, and it, you know, if you're disturbing that, it seems pretty restrictive. So I would recommend increase it. First, I would measure the slope and the direction of the slope, so the 10 feet horizontally in the direction of the slope, to clarify that, and also provide maybe a square footage of a couple hundred square feet or something, that, because you'll end up with these little pockets of slopes on the map, and you know, I don't think the intent would be to restrict someone that has this little band. It'd be like the majority of the property would be steep slopes, and then you'd want to regulate that. So I would try to increase the horizontal dimension and provide some sort of minimum square footage of or area of slope in order to qualify as a slope.
Do you have any suggestions?
I could look through a couple of other codes. Off the top of my head, I would go with like probably 25 feet for the horizontal dimension, and maybe a couple of hundred square feet for the area.
Okay, so let's put that on the follow-up to-do list for Valerie and Jan to connect on that offline. Jan, does that address your concern, or what are your thoughts after hearing that?
I had been concerned that, you know, a lot of maps that exist only have the 15 and the 25%. I'm fine with the 35% if a lot of other towns manage to make it work. I think, yeah, I agree that if we have a boulder or something somewhere, that shouldn't stop anything from happening because it's a steep slope. But I do, and I definitely agree with the idea of putting something new in for this. I think it's really needed.
Okay, Dan, I see you have your hand raised.
I assume the point of having the categories is that they will be treated differently in some way, or the required measures or what you can do there is different. So I just did a quick search for very steep, and like I don't see anything specially noted for that.
In the document, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep that in mind, and we'll keep going.
Okay.
Wonder if extremely steep slopes, which is up on the stream, is supposed to be.
So it has underneath section, it's number 5, approving authority for any application that may involve a regulated disturbance in an area of a very steep slope or extremely steep slope. The planning board shall be the approving authority for the steep slopes permit. So basically, it's not so much restrictions as opposed to who reviews. So there's additional step for the more steep, the very steep slopes and the extremely steep slopes that the planning board needs to review it. The other ones become more of like an administrative permit process, unless there's an application involving pending site plan subdivision, special permit application, and then also anything except as noted above, the town engineer shall be the approving authority for all steep slopes permits.
Okay, got it.
Does that sit okay with the bodies that will be implementing?
It's
Yeah.
typical.
That's typical. Okay, great. Okay, so jumping down,
And just, Jan had made a comment before, and I typically agree with Jan, but I think this should be I would keep this as a standalone chapter in the town code outside of the zoning code, so that it's marked, alongside, stormwater, wetlands. It's going to be a separate permit. It can be woven into the approval processes, and if it's the planning board, that'll take care of itself. But I'd keep this as a separate chapter, and I think most municipalities do so. Yeah.
We'll just
Okay.
have to earmark the existing regs that are in the zoning code should be eliminated.
Yeah.
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
that's super helpful. Valerie, when you update this version of the draft, if you could just put in a footnote or in the header somewhere, like some context on that to just help everybody remember where we're proposing it be added into the code or
Oh, sure.
not.
Sure.
Okay. So next question from Jan, do we want to exempt the town for highway department purposes? I assume is that typical in other towns?
Yeah, and I think you do it with your the other chapter, the fill provisions that you're going to discuss tonight. I think the town highway department or the town's exempt, because if they're going to do some, drainage work on the side of the road, they're maybe grading out a swale or something like that. Oftentimes those are going to exceed your steep slope provisions, and it's just not appropriate to have them go to the planning board or pull a steep slopes permit.
Mm-hmm. That seems important. I see a lot of nodding heads. Okay, moving on. And I see.
Yeah, so would that be just the highway department or do we want to exempt the whole town? I'm trying to think if there's
Yeah,
I-
Parks and Rec. I would
Yeah.
just exempt the town.
the town, yeah, Park and Rec is exactly what I was thinking about. Thanks.
Well, the difference in my mind, what comes to mind is like if it's a resident or something, the concern is you're building something there and maybe negatively affecting erosion, all these things. Whereas when the highway department does this work, they don't have any motivation to like build things to contrary to it. They're trying to solve those issues. So that's why that's aligned. But the town, could have a motivation to try and use some crappy piece of land and do something. So I'm not so sure I would let the town off the hook, the rest of the town off the hook for it.
Charlene?
You can have I understand what is being said, but I think that you can have a notification provision maybe. So that you notify the adjoining owners that you're going to do something with this steep slope. If the highway, unless it's an emergency. So they have a chance to address it.
I think we might.
That just adds administrative burden on the town. So that would be
Yeah,
something
it does. It does. But my feeling is that the town should be exempt. And you shouldn't just say it for emergency purposes. It just should be exempt. But if you want it controlled a bit, I guess notification would be the best control.
Why don't we put a pin in that? Or Andrea, go ahead.
So as far as the town and the highway goes, I understand what Charlene is saying, but when it comes to, sometimes you can't hold up the town from doing certain work, and to put that type of regulation in there is just, it's too much. Things have to be done.
I agree with you.
Maybe for parks and recreation, I'm trying to imagine in my head what properties we have under the realm of Parks and Rec currently in the town. And I'm trying to come up with examples in which there would be neighbors that would be affected by a steep slope. The only steep slope that I can imagine in my head right now, and I'm not saying it's the only one, is the one where the tennis courts are in the town park, because it sits up high and there's already existing tennis courts that are already in there. And, it's one of the projects that's on the list. In my head, I see Fox Valley, I see Onatru, I see I can't imagine another place, but I could see that those particular things, those particular areas under the purview of Parks and Rec, where residents would be upset if things were changed and they weren't given an opportunity to say something about it involving steep slopes, perhaps. And but as far as highway goes, I think that's not the case. That's all.
I think it would be very difficult though to do it for just like Parks and Recs. And I agree with you. I don't think there should be any subject and no regulations. But if one is concerned about that, I think Katie is right. We should put a pin in it and see if anybody is concerned, because
I think maybe
why don't we leave it out of the code, out of the proposed draft right now? And if that comes back as a public comment, then we can consider it at that point.
But I think we should put the town is exempt.
Yes,
As
that's
the,
what I mean.
yeah,
The town
and
is
then-
exempt, but we're not going to do an additional notification process.
And then we can always come back to that if there are
yeah,
problems.
if there's a problem.
And that will apply to the other places it's applicable in the other documents we're referring to as well. Okay, can we move on to the next one? Jan, are you okay? You have your hand raised.
Yeah, I wasn't clear at the I'm okay just saying highway. I think that's more conservative and more appropriate, but I wasn't sure how did it get left?
Direction of town. The town is exempt.
The town? Okay, I got persuaded by our discussion that maybe it should be highway, but I can take, it's a pin, we'll talk about it later.
I could have heard it wrong. Let me stop sharing for just a second. Right, raise your hand if you thought we were saying town is exempt. Okay, most people. Okay, so we're gonna say town is exempt, and we can always come back to it later. I know I saw that in a couple other places too, so I already written that way. Charlene?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I
sorry about that.
No problem. I somehow switched my. Okay. Yes. So then there are a couple the only other comments. So some from Jan. I think a lot of these are.
Can add. That's not a
Yeah,
problem.
I think that Valerie and Jan can work on those together. These are just very technical, since Jan, you're the one who actually
So this
knows in practice.
is important. This is something that's important that gets brought up in a couple different edits or drafts that we're going to be looking at later on. So it deals with this escrow, and it also deals with the performance bond. So there's some question as to who authorizes the performance bond. In most communities, it's the town board or the village board that would ultimately require, so a planning board can require the performance bond, but ultimately a lot of times it's the town board or the village board that, ends up accepting a certain performance bond associated with the project. There seems to be some question as to why it's referred to that way. So I just want to kind of open that up, because maybe your process is a little bit different.
Andrea?
So my thought is this: when it comes to performance bonds and things of that nature, maybe the town should look at setting up some sort of standard or fee schedule, like a certain percentage of the cost of the project or something, whereby the town board doesn't need to ask for a certain amount every time, that there's a standard format, a standard bond application is, and then I think this is related to something that Jan had said a while ago about, I'm used to the town board, the performance bond gets set. And then at the time that it comes that the work is finished and they're requesting that they get their bond money back, that's the application that goes to the town board. But, maybe it's more efficient to have some sort of standard by which, when projects are being performed, that is something already in place, so it doesn't have to go to the town board every time. Only when it's returned, only when we have to give back money does the town board get involved. But the taking of the money for the performance bond, perhaps we can have some sort of standard. And maybe Judd knows better than I to this end.
Yeah, and I agree. Look, we have we have different, there's different bonds that are set up under different chapters. The town board should definitely be involved whenever you have an aspect of site development that involves public infrastructure or something that's going to touch public infrastructure. And I do think there's a way to sort of the town board to cede the kind of the original authority of let's fix this amount to the planning board so we don't have to get involved in kind of a give and take. But I do think that at the end of the day, when it comes to a release, there does have to be town board involvement because we're talking about public infrastructure. So we need to look at those provisions in the zoning code. And then, and look, in the wetland code, there are separate bonding provisions that, I've taken the position, for example, a planting mitigation bond under the wetland statute. That's all on private property, and that's all within the purview of, the planning board's wetland authority. It doesn't involve, any kind of public infrastructure, public improvement. So, that all stays within kind of the province of the planning board. That piece is fine, but it's this sort of yo-yo back and forth with the planning board on both ends, or the town board rather, on both ends, that we need to try to streamline. And the way to do that, as Andrea said, is just to let, if you want to put standards in place, if you want to just empower the town engineer and the planning board to make that call, it's really just a function of determining cost. And the town board, empowering the planning board and or town consultants to come up with a number.
So I can change it to the planning board if you prefer, or the approving authority, whoever the approving authority is for the special permit. And then Judd, would it be possible if you could take a look after I make those changes to make sure you feel comfortable with the language?
Yeah.
Was there anything else? Did that address everything that you mentioned, Andrea, or is there other? Okay, that's good.
And
Yeah.
it would be discretionary as well, right? In some cases, you might not need a bond.
Right.
I forget. I don't have the verbiage in front of me. If it was mandatory, I don't think it'll be required in every case if you have a minor application.
I just think that if we set a guideline, something, that's tangible that people can see, and they say, okay, well, if I'm gonna, they can anticipate, they can foresee what it's going to cost them as far as bond wise, because then if we let the planning board, no offense, Janet, if we let the planning board decide how much it's going to be every time, then you know how our residents are going to feel. They're going to feel, oh, well, this is unfair, and why am I getting this fee? And and I think it kind of, takes the planning board off the hook, so to speak, if it's something that's predetermined and it's something that they can look at and anticipate and say, okay, well, this is what the standard is, and it's not like I'm getting treated any differently than anybody else who's putting an application forward. So
Yeah, so I think as Judd just explained, it's usually based on the cost, and it's generally the cost estimate provided by the applicant of what they're doing. But what I wanted to say is the other thing that doing this, because generally we meet, what has happened in the past is we ask for the town board to delegate it to the planning board, and that takes 2 months of the applicant's, it can take 2 months or maybe more of the applicant's time while this thing, while we ask for the town board to delegate it to us, and then we bring it back, and then we have to make a decision about a public hearing or not, or how we're going to handle it. So I understand there's some cases in which we might still need to talk to the town board in selective things, but to the greatest extent possible, I'd really like to just make this so we can move things along as effectively as possible. Thanks.
Yep, I think everybody's on the same page there. It's good for the town boards. It's good for the applicants. Any streamlining and transparency that helps people plan ahead is awesome. So Valerie, you have everything you need to work with the appropriate people and get that? Okay. Should this be the town engineer? I'm gonna let you and Jan work on some of these nitty-gritty things. This sounds like it's a question that we have to decide. Building inspector and or town engineer. From the people on the ground implementing this, any feelings on what's best there? What is this referring to? For appeals, who's deciding if the who's deciding the application? The building.
In the way we have the approving authority, it's the building inspector that's reviewing and approving these applications. As opposed to the town engineer, because you don't have somebody specifically, a town employee that's a town engineer. So, I mean, the building inspector could consult with the town engineer, right, as a consult, but we set it up as the building inspector. But if for some reason you change that, I mean.
Charlene, what's your?
I would not be comfortable having someone who is just a consultant to the town rather than someone who's employed by the town and has the jurisdiction and authority. And I think that Valerie makes a good suggestion about consulting in consultation with the appropriate parties or whatever.
Right, and I see that there's something in here that refers to a town engineer at the last sentence. Now I'm looking at this, so I will correct that and make sure it just specifically says.
Yeah, because we don't have one. If we had
Right.
one, I think it would be much different. I know it would be different.
And that was probably an error of mine.
Judd, do you agree with that?
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was the
yeah,
point I was making, is that in one place it talked about the building inspector and the other, the town engineer.
Right,
So-
but I think, no,
You
and
got
I think that's a good point,
Building.
Jan,
Yeah.
but then also I saw it in a couple other places where people were asking like, who has the approving authority? So I think it's helpful. Because there's been a few other, not in this particular one, but in a couple other chapters.
Okay, excellent. And then I
Yeah,
see.
I'd also, just in terms of the appeal process, it probably should be the planning board, but I would suggest that the 20 days be 30 days simply to align with other appeal periods.
Mhm. Okay, got that, Valerie? And then here, Valerie took out the at least 60 days, just because in practice, that's not actually happening. And then she made some of these changes too that were admin. Inspection costs, is everybody okay with that? And I think that's a Jan and Valerie thing. Okay, fine numbers. So Valerie, I know you said you use those from another community, and this can be whatever the town would like. But do we have like a standard when you look through the code? It's all over the place, right?
Yeah, that's why I did a lot, and I said, well, we'll start with this, and then, so I mean, I'm happy if there's a particular code or a chapter in the code that you think has a good, penalties for offenses, and I can bring that in, happy to do so. But I just we left it at this.
What's everybody's thought on that? Or who should we ask? Like, is that something we should pose to the building inspector, or Jan or Charlene? You were first. Yeah, building inspector, Jan.
Yeah, the other thing is, I wonder about putting, I know sometimes we put fines or we put fees off to a fee schedule, so it isn't in the code forever. I'm wondering, fines are a little bit different, so, but whether other towns actually keep fees and fines in a document that can be updated by the town board on a more regular or easy basis than the code tends to get updated. I just don't know what other towns do.
Jan?
I think the penalties for offenses belongs in the code. I know we spent a lot of time on this exact paragraph when we had prepared the draft wetlands ordinance that was never adopted. So if you wanted to go back you may want to take a look at the draft of the wetlands code, would probably be the most current provision that, people spend some time thinking about.
Okay. Any other comments or thoughts on that, or what our next steps should be there? Okay. Okay. So that, oh, Charlene, do you still
Yeah,
have?
I have a
Oh,
question.
Dan.
Yeah, just curious, and just by way of education, like it seems to me there are violations and there are violations, right? Like could be very modest, like impinging on the steep slopes, you know, unintentional, and it could be some gargantuan like steep slope that threatens the house up above it, and like it's you know, it seems to me that those be differentiated potentially, you know, and you know, maybe it's impossible to do that, but I'm just
They are in the sense that it does give latitude to the building inspector and how they want to enforce those violations. So if you read in fine print, technically every day could be a new violation, right? Sometimes building inspectors would just give the initial violation or, you know,
Okay.
notice to remedy, right? So it depends on the degree in which what the violation is, that, and that's why it kind of gives a little bit of latitude for the building inspector to make that determination.
and I guess there's always the remedy itself. So okay.
Charlene.
There's usual discretion for building inspectors on that, Dan. I think it's fine. But the fee schedule usually, well, I've seen it in a number of places. It's sort of like a Schedule A. And that, you're right, Katie, that's sort of like updated periodically. But the fines are the fines. You know, it
All right.
does belong in the
And this is not less. So okay.
Okay. Jan.
fees differently.
I just wanted to mention that, you know, for the more benign violations, usually it starts out with an order to remedy, as someone just mentioned. So usually they're building inspectors just looking for compliance right away. And then if they don't get compliance, that's when these fines would kick in.
Mhm.
Okay. That is the end of the comments on this. Does everybody, any lingering thoughts before we move on? You know, you'll see an updated draft. If you have thoughts in the meantime, you can always send an email or make a comment in the document. Charlene, Dan, do you have your hand? Okay.
Sorry.
Got it. Okay, let's move on to the next one. The next one, excavation and fill. This Valerie's comments from 3A, steep slopes, apply to this as well. This came out of the discussion during last month's meeting that this was something that was missing, and so this is a new section. And the first comment is, so 5 cubic yards. Valerie, is that in there somewhere? I searched for 5.
Right
Oh,
there.
okay.
It says the permit from the planning board shall be required for any operation in this chapter, which by is defined as landfilling activities. And it
Oh,
says or greater than 5 cubic yards of
Okay.
quantity.
Got it. Okay, so that's resolved, I think.
And I can, if people are missing it, then maybe what I can do is I can try to I highlight that in terms of maybe putting that first, you know, all land activity, you know, is right, you know,
I think that
that
would be
meets this
good.
criteria, other than that is regulated, and then have the second thing as a permit from the planning board shall be required or something like that.
Perfect.
I think
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Jan?
I think 5 cubic yards is a pretty small amount. I
Oh,
mean, I get that delivered to my house each spring just to top dress the lawn and mulch and stuff. I mean, that's
Right.
a pretty small amount of
Right.
material.
So that's correct. So that is, I put that in as like a starting point, and if you want to allow for more material, then that's fine. I mean, clearly that's fine, but I purposely started with that
Yeah.
amount.
Mm-hmm. Charlene? You're on mute.
Do we have any provisions to make sure that the fill is good? It doesn't seem like there's any, you know, there shall not be, but
I think
who's
we
looking?
have something on that. I think that comes up
Yeah.
later.
You want the
Hold that.
soil manifests and certified clean.
Okay, okay, I didn't see it. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Jan?
Yeah, I think the I'm addressing the 5 cubic yards. I think the fact that some of the exemptions include top dressing the soil and all that stuff means that it's really used as fill as opposed to, you know, something that's spread over. So it is a discernible difference. So I'm okay with that. The other thing I put in, I went to a place that had raised beds that were like 2.5 to 3 feet high. And obviously, you know, if somebody does that, I'm not sure that, I think maybe that could be an exemption as well. But so the top dressing kind of comment that Jan said is an exclusion. I think
think
I'd rather.
you could put
start-
5 cubic yards of material in the back of your pickup truck. You know, it's just a very small amount to start requiring. Are these going to the planning board? Or are it's just a very small amount of material
Valerie?
to regulate, in my opinion.
Where-
We have an application, it would require a permit, yes, from the planning board. The town, so, hold on, let me pull this up. So, so this would require anything that falls above 5 cubic yards would be required. Now, we could do something similar to what we're doing with the steep slopes, where you have an administrative approval if you want, or we could just have something like, you know, something starting off at 10 cubic yards. It's really up to the
Yeah, it's up to
town.
the town. Yep.
Well, what's the intention? I mean, the intention is for very big projects that are going to have an impact on the environment.
Well, keep in mind though, if a project's already associated with a site plan, right, that already gets worked into that. But I think in terms of, like, for example, like single family homes, you don't really, so if somebody's putting a larger addition on their single family home, that might require excavation or fill, and right now it doesn't require any sort of approval from the planning board. So this would allow for potentially some sort of review from the building department to say, okay, if you're excavating this much, this is the type of like erosion and sediment control, you know, that we would want to see on site, you know, just some sort of protections for like the neighboring properties, or to make sure if somebody is coming in with to regrade their property, that that the fill is clean, those types of things.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have feelings about 5 as the number?
I think it's too low. I agree with Jan. I think we have to, what we're really focused on is the big projects. And, you know, someone who's doing a small project on their property, or it's just too much to have to go to the planning board and get an approval. So I agree that we have to come up with a number much more than 5 cubic yards. I don't know exactly what that is. I'm not good at a visual. Jan obviously is, like, you can visualize what it is. I can't.
I
But
think we have some expertise there.
yeah.
So Jan, based on your experience with the town, what do you think would be a good number to accommodate like the concerns that they have, but not something that's overly burdensome?
Yeah, I'd like to go through it again and
Okay.
look at some other towns and
Okay.
Cool. That's a homework item. I think that'll be good, to have something grounded in your knowledge of what's happening here in town. Okay, and then I think Jan raised an exemption for raised beds. What is that? I think that's a good idea because those are pretty common. Okay.
Well, actually, if you go to 10 cubic, or, you know, it's just, I thought a couple of raised beds could get to 5 cubic yards pretty fast. So I wanted, but if it's a higher amount, you're not going to make, you know, an immense amount of raised beds. So that probably can get dropped if the amount gets higher.
Mhm.
But I do think there are some small lots that could do a pretty dramatic change. So I don't want to see it, you know, I'd be okay with 10 yards, 10 cubic yards, but I don't want to see it go to like 100. I don't know.
Okay. We'll come back to that. Ad preparation, this seems like Yes, what do we think about that? Add preparation of soil erosion plan control. Sounds
Yeah, I think our other codes require,
Yep.
so this really just adds erosion control.
okay. Got it. And then we can, this goes to the same idea, well, sort of stuff we talked about before, back and forth, and who's the authority here?
Right, so I think I raised this, and now this is something that I put in the building inspector on purpose. Because now, again, happy to change this, but I was kind of thinking this through, that somebody could come in, say they're gonna bring in fill, provide all the information, but they don't know exactly who their supplier is, or will have the manifest until they go for the actual permit itself, and at which point that they could submit it to the building department.
Yeah,
That being, go ahead.
the
what'd you
building
say?
inspector will have the boots on the ground at that point in time to kind of carry the ball forward once it's left the planning board. That makes sense, Valerie.
Okay. So then that was fixed. Okay, this. Do you want to talk about that, Jan? That the restrictions.
Yes.
That.
Just to comment on the fill, I don't want to leave the building inspector with too much discretion on to what's satisfactory to him. I think it, like before when we talked about what the fees were going to be, or, you know, for a bond, or I think there has to be something built in so that it's clear and there's no, you know, I really would like to reduce the times where a applicant or a resident is complaining that they're being treated unfairly. Whereas if we put regulations in there, I think it protects the resident as well as our building inspector, because, you know, people can see what it's, you know, what it is. And so it's not going to be a surprise. And
Yeah.
I mean, is there a reference, Jan, we could make
Yeah.
to site code?
There's a standard
Right.
that I could provide that is widely accepted, and it's very specific as to, you know, what parameters the fill can contain and cannot contain. I think it's a good idea to insert it so everybody is aware and is on the same level.
Yeah, absolutely. Charlene?
Yeah, I was
Oh.
going to repeat what they said.
Perfect. Okay, great. Okay, then, so the town engineer, oh, that's what we were just talking about. Okay.
I think Jan had some other questions about that section.
Yeah, just I didn't know if this is more, the town engineer should be able to review the entire application. I guess these are like more like certification statements at the end, that before an approval could be granted by the planning board, the town engineer would have to kind of assert this. I just didn't want it to limit the town engineer's review of the application by these 3 criteria.
So maybe, I mean, I guess we could just, I mean, I can even just change it instead of the town engineer shall state, like, you know, maybe something to the extent that, like, the review shall be, you know, shall be required to include but not limited to, you know what I mean? And then maybe
Yeah.
list those 3 things then.
Or, you know, following, you know, complete review of the application, the
Yeah,
town engineer
okay.
shall certify, and then have those 3 things, but.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Charlene, did you have a comment on that? Okay.
No.
Then here, so is this this is the difference between building inspector and planning board.
Yeah,
Did we,
so
did we fix that?
right, so in this particular situation, a lot of times the town engineer would be the one to kind of give that cost estimate, but again, I'm happy to change it to the building inspector.
I think it should be the applicant typically provides the estimate, and then someone reviews that estimate. It could either be the town engineer likely or the building inspector, but the The owner should be on the applicant to provide the cost estimate. And then we just review it to make sure it makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, Jan, did that
Yeah,
answer?
I think I was on the one above that before the, I think it's the small two there. I thought that it's basically the building inspector who looks to make sure that the requirements comply with zoning, or that the application complies with zoning. And the use complies with zoning. I don't, since I
Yeah,
just,
you're right. That is within the province of the building department.
so, and it's listed there under the
As
town
town
engineer's role.
engineer, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's more to make it our code enforcement officer is the building inspector, and he's the one who adjudicates. So I thought that was just to clarify it, to make it how it works in our town. It might be different in a town that has a town engineer on staff as opposed to kind of on call, or as a consultant, but
Why don't I just remove that? Because I don't think that's really completely pertinent. I think the more important things related to what the town engineer is doing is just reviewing the application
Yeah.
itself.
I agree.
Good.
yep, me too. Great,
So-
thanks.
Performance bond, I know we talked about these earlier.
Yes.
Dan?
I'm wondering, does some of that stuff lend itself to like creating a form for the engineer to check these things off, comply with that, comply with that, comply with that, rather than like.
You can create forms after you adopt these regulations.
All right, this seems a lot of work to like just scribble all that stuff up, but it's going to repeat itself. Okay.
Yeah, no, I would recommend that after, the town adopts, that you develop applications specifically for the steep slopes and excavation and fill.
Well, this is part of the application. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Alright, good.
Performance bond. Valerie, you were gonna say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think Judd and I will connect on performance bonds, because
Yeah.
we'll just use the same language for, it doesn't make sense to have different performance bond language. For everything. No need to make anything more confusing.
Okay, and then this, you just need to take a look at. Valerie and Jan can make sure that gets fixed, and then that was a sort of typo thing. And then is this indeed meant to be the ZBA? Or
For
what is-
appeals, yes, it was going to be
Okay,
the ZBA, and I can make it more clear.
okay. And then allow professional. That's
Yeah, the escrow. I'm gonna be I'll add some language for the escrow.
Okay, we made it through the second document, you guys. Any lingering thoughts on this one? Okay, good. That's very thorough and I think super helpful. And this is recorded, so you can go back and listen and make sure we got everything. Dan, did you have a question? Or is that that was left over? Okay. Okay, let's move on to wetlands. And this is existing. This was already in the code, and this is our second review of it, so this should go a little more quickly. In preparation, there wasn't anything relevant until page 9, and that's here. Is this an obvious one to you, Valerie, or?
No, I mean, we can add a definition for administrative wetland permit. That's not a problem.
Is that necessary? Yes, okay, good, then do it. Okay, that makes sense.
That could probably, if there's going to be a definition for administrative wetland permit, then it's fine as written.
Okay,
There's
good.
I think a wetland permits from the planning board, administrative wetland permits from the wetland inspector.
Yes.
or consultant.
Got it. Okay. Let me just- Oh, yeah, that-
List of
this-
examples was moved. So that's why I said yes, it was.
Okay. Single flooding event, is that okay? I think that does make it more clear. Okay. Are you okay with this, Jan, or do you see there's something?
I was just wondering if this changed at all from what exists today.
Okay.
We brought that in from the regulations that you were proposing previously.
Okay. I have to go back and look at Appendix A. The unique thing about Lewisboro is and the definition of wetland is in most, like the Army Corps, they require 3 criteria to be a wetland: hydrology, vegetation, and soils, hydric soils. In Appendix A of the existing town code, you only need 2, which is, you could have just wetland vegetation without wetland hydrology or soils, and it could be classified as a wetland. So I just want to see if I don't know if we were proposing to amend Appendix A at the time, but I just want to make sure that still is consistent.
Okay, so so if there is some inconsistency or you need to amend that, just hop back in and add tweak that definition.
But I think that when we proposed to amend it and go back to the 3 criteria, it came with a lot of resistance because it was viewed as being, less conservative. So if you don't want to have that fight, I suggest you just keep it as is.
Okay, so then yes, then we're so close to maybe passing, finally getting some updates to this law.
Yeah.
I think you all could probably guess where I am with that, with the less conservative. I would prefer the 3 criteria because I think it's overly burdensome on the residents to have, I think there needs to be more clarification, but I don't think that comes to any surprise to anybody who's sitting
I
on
don't
the committee that I would have that opinion, but
I don't disagree with you. It's a unique definition the way it's written, and it's, you could have a wetland inspector that is just going around and classifying wetlands based on vegetation, and it's could be problematic.
I just don't see
supported
the need
three.
to be more restrictive than the Army Corps of Engineers.
That's a policy call, so I just sit on the side, but I think that's a discussion for the town board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Charlene?
When it was first passed, does anybody know the history of it and why it was passed in such a manner?
No, and I would say, like, I hear everybody, and I would say, like, probably let's just get this done. And if we want to come back to that, I'd like to have different people make a case and have maybe a special thing and have experts come and all that. But maybe we want to do that, as a next thing after we put the whole plan to bed and just get this consistent right now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe
'cause
just
it's-
mark it as a policy decision and we can revisit, but then it can also be addressed at the level of when the town board finally gets them. Also, at that point, have a discussion and we will have kind of like all the background from the experts and the consultants so that we can make a decision at the level where it comes to us for adoption or amendment.
Yeah. Charlene, did you have something?
Yeah, I would ask, what is the background of it? Because to get something like that through, that's so much more restrictive, there probably was a reason for it.
So our action item is we don't need to we're not trying to amend anything. So this language stays the same, but we do have to just make a mental note of if that's a separate discussion, if something is going to be amended down the line.
I agree that it's a policy decision, but then we did say that we weren't going to make amendments to anything at this point. Was that sort of the decision? Because I know there were issues about Airbnb and a couple of other things that we were interested in changing, and yet that's not going to be in because it may make it too controversial.
I think the distinction there is that if Valerie and her team suggested it or heard the feedback and then are making the recommendation, then it's in these documents, we're discussing it, and if everyone's okay with it, it's going to the town board. But if Valerie and her team don't have the background and the feedback from the public yet, then we're not going to be discussing. And that's what happened with Airbnb, because the complaints started to come in after when we had the spring meetings. So that's the distinction there. Jan?
Yeah, so I think I remember, but I might have to go talk to Jim Norgren again if I can find him about, and maybe Paul Lewis, who was the planning board chair when these things were put in. But I would be hesitant to change this without really hearing about situations in which the 2 criteria triggered a wetland definition where 3 did not, where if they looked at 3, it would not have. I mean, I think it's probably has to do with being more protective of the wetlands. And from what I read or understood of the comments, that was very much in line with what the public wanted. So I don't see a reason to go back, but I will try to find out some more about the history. When I say go back, retreat.
Okay, so let's put a pin in it and leave it the way it is, but circle, make a note of that for future discussion. Did you have something else, Charlene?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. Okay, next comment.
So sorry, just before you go away from this page.
Yeah, go for it.
I see wetland inspectors deleted, and I'd imagine that came from the prior draft as well. I just want to make sure that in terms of enforcement, is the wetland consultant charged with inspection, or is the with issuance of violations, or is that the building inspector?
Went through, and there were a couple instances where we still had wetland inspector, but we changed it to wetland consultant. Let me just see.
I think if I remember the prior draft correctly, I have a problem with the wetland consultant issuing the violations, because there's been people that have said, and I don't really disagree with them, that you could issue a wetland violation as the wetland consultant, turn around and say, hey, you have to go to the planning board, and then you're collecting an escrow and reviewing that application. It's a little funny. It isn't abused right now, but it can be questioned, and it just doesn't really feel right. So I think what we did with the draft regs was the wetland consultant, the violation was actually issued by the building inspector. And the building inspector can consult with the wetland consultant to, ensure, where's the wetland line? Did something occur in the wetland buffer? Is this a violation? But more as a consultant than the actual person issuing the violation. And that helped kind of separate those two functions and reduce the conflict, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I see that it says enforcement agents. So I'll change that to this chapter shall be enforced by the building inspector.
Judd,
Okay.
do you remember that kind of?
Yeah, no, and I agree. One that it really creates a problem now with the empowerment of the planning board to hear these,
Yeah.
glad we're moving away from that, because this really should be, and the current system withstood judicial scrutiny years ago, but it's very awkward to have someone before the planning board on a violation and then spin it into a permit. It's just, the planning board's wearing too many hats. And then, as Jan said, even if the wetland consultant or the wetland inspector is the enforcement agent, so, they trot into local court, yet once they're back before the planning board, because that's what's going to happen, the justice court's going to tell them to go, cure it before the planning board. It's now back with the person who issued the violation. So very long-winded way of saying I agree with Jan.
Yeah, so I mean, we do have the if we change that, then the enforcement agent is the building inspector, and the building inspector is the one who's supposed to be issuing the violations. However, inspections get done by the wetland consultant.
Correct.
Yeah,
Because you need the consultant out there to determine where
right.
the wetland is.
Right.
Because the building
Okay.
inspector is not going to know how to delineate a wetland.
I think we're good. I just changed one word, and I think everything else sets up.
I have a new
Okay.
appreciation for how complicated this all is. Okay, so Andrea, your question here, adding a definition to what exactly is a wetlands consultant. Is that something, Valerie, that can get put in, or is that common in other codes?
I defer to Jan on this, since he is,
Okay,
a wetland
Jan?
scientist. If there's a particular something we should.
How's that usually dealt with?
I think it's in the code already.
Yeah, why don't you mark that one for, I mean, I'd work with Valerie, I'd work with you and Jan on that to try to iron that out and make sure we're consistent.
Okay, that sounds good. Jan, did you have a question on that?
Yeah, it's the town board who appoints the wetland consultant or who hires them. So,
Yeah, they get vetted through the town board.
yeah, so it's really that I agree that we could certainly say it ought to be, they'd have this or that, but it is a town board discretion. So by putting this in, we would be kind of putting boundaries or blind, limits on what the town board might want to do. So I think there are certifications and stuff out there. I think the town board might want to be aware of those, but I think it's their discretion on appointing or hiring or engaging the right wetland consultant.
Charlene?
Certifications change, criteria change. It's professional, it's a profession. So if you put something in and then it changes, then you have to change the code. So as Jan said, the town board should be aware of what the criteria is when they appoint the consultant.
Andrea, do you have thoughts on that?
I'm just listening to what everybody was saying. I just, a lot of times I will be approached and asked questions such as, how did this person get this job? What makes them qualified to do that job? So when I was reading this, although I can say, I know what a qualified wetlands consultant is, like, I look at their resume and I can figure it out. But I just thought, for the resident who's reading the code, that even if I don't want to say that it was vague, but at least, a certified wetland consultant, or, something that indicates that there's a level of qualification and that we're not just hiring another building inspector who has that type of education, or, that it's just something that indicates that it's something more than just, well, he's lived in town for 20 years, so he must know what a wetland, you know what I'm saying? Just something to point to that clarifies and doesn't have to say that they have to have a bachelor's degree in this, and then they have to have 5 certifications in that. That's not what I meant. I just meant something that kind of outlines for the reader that there's something other than just
an
Mhm.
appointment.
So
Yeah.
maybe add
Right.
in front of appointed, say, the town wetland consultant, a qualified professional appointed by the town of Lewisboro, so that,
Something like that.
okay, got it.
Cool. Think we can make that work. Charlene, did you have anything?
No,
That-
that's
okay.
it. I think that's a good,
That's good. Okay. Move my screen here. Let's see what we got here. Oh, okay. So Andrea or Jan, do you want to address this?
Which one would that be? I'm still seeing the wetland inspector.
So an applicant shall provide sufficient information. So this is kind of same theme, like, is there a way we can make it clear what people have to provide so that, and that it's consistent every time? Or is this might be outlined somewhere else?
Katie, I don't
I
think you've
think we're,
moved
I
the
haven't moved the
screen.
page. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
sorry. Thank you. That's better, right?
Okay, the applicant shall provide sufficient. Yeah, there should be, we could potentially, I believe later on in the code, there's a list of items that need to be submitted with the application.
Yeah, I
so
think
maybe
it's
it's
in application procedures. There's something,
Yeah, so maybe it's a reference to,
Okay.
it's very
yeah.
specific what needs to be submitted. So I would just reference that section there.
Cool. That I saw a thumbs up. Okay. All right. So we've got a few. Okay, and actually, hold on. Let me see how much we have to get through here because we are. I think this is super productive, so I don't want to stop us, but we have a lot more of this wetlands page to get through. Okay, so quick poll of the group. Should we keep going with wetlands as we're going now and get through that and then quickly touch on the other things? We have till 9:30. Maybe we could push to like 9:45 or what are thoughts here? Should we finish this and then move on?
Yeah,
Okay.
the wetland is probably the most important section, so yeah.
Yeah, I'd stay with that one. Yeah.
I think we should push through and get it done.
Okay. Okay. Just wanted to make sure I wouldn't have mutiny if that was the case. Okay, so let's go to Jan's question here.
Yeah, this exists in the code today, this language, but I've always kind of struggled with it. Because a bulk, I don't know if it's a defined term, but if you have a home heating tank, there's plenty of them in the wetland buffers all over town and even new installations. So I just maybe it's of a certain gallonage, like the county regs. I think once you're over, maybe it's 1,000 gallons, you have to get a bulk storage permit. So maybe it deserves a definition for bulk petroleum storage.
That makes sense to me. I'm seeing nodding heads. Yes. Okay.
That typical store 1,000 gallons, but I don't know if 1,000 gallons is too much or whether you want to see something smaller than that.
Well, your typical tank for a house is going to be 500 gallons, I think.
You're 550, I think.
550. So
Yeah.
I would go with, I think there's a definition from the county on bulk storage, and that would be consistent. I'd just be consistent with that.
not saying it's right to have these things in the buffer, but they do exist and there are lots where that's.
Yeah, I mean, there's
you really
no,
can't prohibit it. It's just,
there's no other alternative.
right. So it's not optimal, but
Yeah.
yeah.
It requires a permit. These are prohibited acts, right? So, right, we're under the list of
Yes.
prohibited, right? So, yeah, can't prohibit it.
Okay. What do we think about adding a further definition to other materials here? Does Does that make sense to everybody? Maybe using language like including but not limited to.
Well, this is one where
Yeah.
we've had some discussion about it. So the question is whether other materials there is a subset of construction and demolition materials, or is it,
Wood chips.
yeah,
Yeah.
what is it? So I just, if we want it to mean wood chips, then well, that could be I don't know. Anyway, to me, that's never been really clear once you say other materials. And
Say deposits or filling consisting of construction or demolition materials or asphalt, right? Because
Eliminate
think-
other materials.
Right.
I think that's what is meant, but it's really it's difficult to understand.
All right, so I'll just remove that.
That makes it way more clear. Okay.
On number 4 there, it may require some discussion. I know that there's definitions provided, and that's great, but paddocks, these are prohibited acts, right? So there's no permit possible for these items. And I get animal feedlots, and I haven't read the definition for pens, but if it's a typical animal pen, I agree with that. But paddocks and pasture land, there's quite a bit of that in wetland buffers, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. So I would be careful about paddocks and pastures. We've also
That's,
had
that's in a wetland or water
Yeah, a
course, not the
wetland or a
buffer.
water course.
wetland.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
there's no buffer. Yeah, because I don't
Okay,
think we're
good.
talking about in a buffer.
No, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I'm showing the wrong part of the screen. Is that cleared up?
Yeah.
Okay. What else do we have here? Okay, this is a good question. Do zoning setbacks apply here? I need to show.
That was something that's already in your code, so I'm gonna leave it up to you to decide how you would like to handle this one.
I think it shouldn't be here. It's already regulated in the zoning code.
Okay, so I can remove this then.
I think so, in my
Okay.
opinion.
Everybody okay with that? Okay. Okay, swimming pool size. So Jan specifically had this concern because of the third largest pool that apparently exists within Lewisboro. So she was suggesting like some kind of very high upper limit to prevent weird outlier situations like that.
Well, just to have it would just have it then come to the planning board instead of, and really, and I think also, yeah, that's 50 linear feet. I think, but I certainly, I don't know.
I think, Jen, with the added excavation and fill permit, most pools are going to end up going to you anyway, even the typical pool. Depending on the quantity there, because you're certainly that large pool would have for pretty much any quantity you came up with. I think it's tremendous, but I think depending on the quantity you put into the fill permit, you're going to end up seeing these.
Okay.
And that, just to clarify, that only applies if someone were putting a pool in a wetland or wetland buffer.
Right. This one does.
So it's not any pool in town.
Well, no, but if you look back on your excavation and fill permit, if you install a pool, the 5 cubic yards, is the first couple bucketfuls, right? So you would definitely see those permits.
Gotcha. And
That's
then
what I
so
want.
excavation would be for any pool in town.
Yeah, that's why I want to, I'm hesitant on the yardage.
This would be overkill, and this would just, when you start limiting the size of a pool, people forget, it's not going to be.
Okay, well, I'll take away the requirement for the size limit. I think maybe actually that this is inside the wetland, and maybe that's something that should go more generally in the zoning code itself, where you know, we ought to look at structures that are huge. I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
off topic, but I'm just going to say, you know,
That-
today we don't have anything that says they have to have covers. If they're heated, they don't have, you know, we don't really, we're not good on swimming pools. So maybe it's not a wetland issue and with the fill, we will have a chance to look at them and have some comments.
John?
But even if it comes to the planning board, is there a criteria you're going to apply, or is it kind of arbitrary, or, well, you know, there, without some kind of a criteria or guideline, how do you make the decision?
Well, if it's in the wetland, there's code in the wetland buffer that says you should minimize disturbance, and so we can have that conversation.
That's a little vague, minimize, you know, I'm just saying.
Let's put a pin that I think we can take this comment off the table here in wetlands, but let's put a pin in just that idea, because just, you know, the idea of the excavation code having these extra like knock-on effects, just something to keep in mind. Okay. That needs to be changed. Do you want to, what's this question, Jan? It's stated
Sorry,
in,
I was muted. Yeah, so I think right now, if you go up to what this refers to, I'm sorry,
It's in a wetland.
it's a
It's where-
regulated, okay. So regulated, so it says,
This is, this would only be in the buffer, because if it was in the wetland itself, it would have to go to the planning board. These are for administrative wetland permits. But if this deck was proposed in the wetland proper, there's other provisions in the code that's sending that to the planning board because it's in the wetland.
okay, that was my question, that I thought that if it was in the wetland itself, it comes to the planning board. That's elsewhere. Okay, good.
okay. Need definitions here. Can you and Valerie can work on that together?
Yeah, this is an issue that's occurring right now. So we can
I was gonna say.
pesticides and fertilizers. Yeah.
Okay.
Anywhere we can be as clear as possible and just set expectations clearly would be fantastic. Okay,
So that just brought up a different thing to me. I mean, like New York State says you can't apply fertilizers after December 1st. We don't have any ability to give any relaxation of that rule or anything, right? I mean,
No.
the state rule.
Mine's not on the fertilizers as much as the pesticides.
Okay.
Whether it includes what pesticides means. And
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So we didn't have any comments for a bunch of pages here. Consider, yeah, what do we think about that? Is this meant to add more flexibility?
That was the idea. But you know, so we are required to have a public hearing, or for anything that stays with the planning board, if we delegate it to be handled administratively, then we don't have a wetland, then we don't have a public hearing. I'm just wondering if it's minor. It's really not important for the.
I agree. I think it can be, this site plan's discretionary too, Judd, or no?
Yes. Yeah.
So making it may just gives us a little more discretion.
Or a separate provision that allows the planning board to waive it,
Under, right.
under certain
Under
criteria.
certain circumstances. Yeah.
Right, well, I think that's the issue then, because then we have to start identifying what those circumstances are, or whether do we want to just allow for just like, because the site plan just has a blanket waiver, right? That doesn't say you have to have, I mean, it doesn't have specific criteria in which you can waive. So maybe we just allow for that similar waiver. Because if not, then we have to start coming up with what the criteria is to allow
I
for
prefer to, yeah, I prefer to keep it with just may and
Yeah,
not, try to-
Fine with
yeah.
that. Yeah. Because I think it's, in a lot of instances, you know, the board knows of an application needs a public hearing or not. They know. And, you know, a lot of cases it's just not necessary.
I would agree.
Okay. I think we're. Oh, okay. How do folks feel about Jan's suggestion here? Where a owner of the water body is not known, and an organization would like to take action.
So this is very unique and I understand that. So we can defer this. We did have one situation where we really didn't know. It was pretty difficult. We had to get, and we came up with a workaround, but the law really didn't allow a workaround. So, you
But
know, we developed one. I live in fear of the day we find another invasive in the lake and have to do something.
I'm sure we can come up with language to address that, Jen. I think it's a good idea.
Thanks.
I didn't realize that was the context. Yeah, I mean, I think we want to be able to address invasives. So if we can, yeah, can we put that on your homework list, Jan?
Yes, to look
Yeah.
back.
Yeah, I'll work with
Yeah.
Jan on that also. Yeah.
Great. Okay, excellent. Think that might be okay, these.
Bond, so we can skip this section.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all that bond stuff again.
Oh, okay, got it. And then you said Valerie would be dealing with the escrow stuff.
Yeah.
Same as here. Okay. Yeah, okay. That's the end of that. Does anybody have any lingering questions or things that we didn't address? I shouldn't say questions, any comments that we didn't talk about that you wanted to? Okay, I think that was, I know that was a little tedious, but I think it was really, really helpful and productive, because now that is going to be ready to go. We'll look at the next version, obviously, but I think that does a lot of really good streamlining. Okay, so now moving on to batch number 2. And some of these will be quicker than others. But we still have some time in the actual scheduled meeting. So pushing forward. Architectural and Community Appearance Review Council. There were only a couple things here. In the opening paragraph, there are.
I removed it.
Yes, Valerie removed it, but I did just want to double check with the group. Like, there's the word morals. There was very broad agreement that we should get rid of that in this sentence. And then I just want to double check it. That sentence still remains like a very positive. We want this code exists to promote the health, safety, and general welfare of the community. So I think that sentence is very positive. The other thing I just wanted to check with the group about was removing this version of that earlier. It's repetitive and it's stated in more of a negative fashion. So if we take that out, the bottom sentence can just ring for itself. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. And then quick poll. I'm just gonna raise your hand if I think in the code we use chair versus chairperson. or it typically says chairman, but we're gonna change it. Is everybody okay with the preference of chair versus chairperson? Chair. Okay, so we're gonna change that everywhere. We're also changing secretary to administrator. And where it's he/her, we can just change it to there.
Right, and Judd, you and I will have to talk about that, because that's gonna be I was telling Katie, that's gonna make fun local law. So whether if ultimately we decide to just, like, the town decides to repeal and replace, that might be easier, so.
All right.
Well, I mean, we'll have to talk about it at some point in time,
Got it.
because there are a
Yeah.
number of instances throughout the zoning with that.
Yep, okay.
Just to be clear, is that the him or her, or is that chair and secretary?
All of it.
All of it. So the town law really has chairman in it, or?
Zoning, yes, you have a chairman is referred to a
Oh,
lot throughout your
okay.
town code.
Sorry, I didn't realize that.
Don't apologize. We're updating the code. We need to bring it, need this opportunity to make it all consistent and best practice. So I think it's for the best. Okay, so I think that this was the next question. Oh, we answered that. That was just for clarification. This one, I think, I had one question. It doesn't say in here that the meetings need to be public, that the monthly meeting needs to be public. Is that it's already happening that it's public and it's noticed.
So
whenever there are meetings that are being held to discuss items on the agenda, like applications and stuff like that, those have to be published agendas that have to be, whether they're open or
Why
not.
don't I just say that they're subject to open meetings laws?
Open meetings law, yeah.
Yeah, and that's it, and I'll cover it.
Okay,
Yeah,
I just thought it was funny that it didn't say that in here. So
Mhm.
It's an approval board, so I think it has to.
Right, it automatically is, but I can put it in there.
Okay. Then I think
That's
that
safe.
that was the only other. Everything else was just some admin things.
Yes.
That were good.
With this, just to let everybody know, the biggest change with this is that we're adding very specific structures that would also require a CARC review. And that goes right back to the comprehensive plan, where right now none of your listed historic structure, National Register places, districts, or any of those things are even required to have any sort of review when they have either additions, construction, or demolition. And so we're just suggesting those important buildings do require at least architectural review.
Mm-hmm.
And that's whether they're in the scenic overlay character district or not.
Correct, or not, right, because there's a lot that are not within that special character overlay. Okay.
Everybody's comfortable with that? I highlighted the goals there too that everybody can see are related. Okay, good, great.
We'll just have to have a little questionnaire or something for the building department that a lot of those applications start with an application with the building department. They'll have to know if they're on the registry or not. It's probably not something they're keen to doing now, but it's easily done.
Important homework. Okay. Moving on to cluster development. There weren't that many comments in here either. I just wanted to highlight there was a very specific goal objective that was associated with this. And then this, yeah, Valerie a lot of these were administrative and Valerie already implemented them. Okay, Valerie, do you want to walk through this one?
So, yeah, I mean, I think really just The biggest change on this one, I think, really deals with the bulk and regulations, because you had in there, regardless of the underlying zoning district, lots created within a cluster shall at minimum meet the dimensional standards of bulk regulations of the R1A zone. And then it said further, each lot shall contain at minimum 35,000 square feet. And so one of the things that not all your lots, not all your zoning districts, especially the residential zoning districts where you could experience your subdivisions, have a minimum lot size of 35,000 square feet. So we added specifically in the R2A and R4 zoning districts, you want a minimum of 35,000 square foot lots as part of the cluster. But in some of your smaller zoning districts, you could potentially allow the planning board more discretion in terms of the lot size. So that's really what we changed in this one.
Just so you know that, I mean, probably aware that where it's saying 35,000 square feet of contiguous buildable area, that's not gross lot area. That's, you know, taking the subtractions out of for the steep slopes and the wetlands and such.
Right, exactly. So your R2A and R4 are 2 acre and 4 acre minimum. So this is technically, it would be definitely a reduced lot size in those zoning districts, but you also have some smaller zoning districts where where 35,000 square feet is not is not even the minimum for the lot, for the actual lot area. And so what we're suggesting is to encourage potentially more cluster so that you can actually preserve those natural resources to allow that flexibility in terms of the overall lot area.
Does anybody have any questions or general comments? Okay. Great. Oh, Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, just to note, I guess, in this type of code, you know, it leads off by saying that it's meant to encourage the preservation of open space and such things. But I think we have like the bare minimum cluster code, because it basically says, you know, that the total number of units will remain this, you know, shouldn't exceed what you could get if you used your normal subdivision. So I'm just wondering, you know, I guess this is a policy thing, but you know, what the options are to push it a little further, and whether or not there's some, you know, advantage to looking at that. I'm just throwing it out there as a thing.
Well, I think, what are you referring to, Dan?
Well, there could be like some kind of additional density if you save more land, or, you know, something to that effect. In other words, I'm sure there's half a dozen ways that people sort of incentivize even lower impact development of sorts.
That actually leads to a conversation we're going to try to squeeze in before the end, and that's kind of maybe your senior overlay. We were talking about creating that. That's where you could potentially give some additional density bonus if somebody comes in with a senior overlay housing that is an automatic cluster, right? It wouldn't necessarily be your typical subdivision, and you could potentially provide some additional density bonuses to kind of incentivize the senior housing, but then also the cluster.
Well, let's put a pin in that.
Right.
And come
Okay.
back to it. Charlene, all right, we'll come back to it. Okay, broader discussion. Okay, anything else on the cluster development?
Yeah, just for some context, I mean, the cluster, Dan's right that this provision came about during a subdivision, the Popoli subdivision, which is, you know, 10 or 15 years old. And they were proceeding with a cluster, and it was just on the heels of an approval, and we realized we didn't have a cluster law, so that this did get generated fairly quickly, and it was a pretty bare bones law to get it done, so that application could proceed. So I'm sure it doesn't have all the bells and whistles. We could certainly could look into those.
Yeah, I'm happy to expand this, right? I wanted to, when I looked at the cluster, right? Because again, I'm trying to look at it from, I know the town wants to make sure that you're implementing the comprehensive plan, but I also am very cognizant that I don't, we're focusing on tweaks and stuff. So I'm happy to expand this a little bit more and put in some of there's more language even in the town law. This clearly refers to the town law, like New York State town law, but we can even bring that language in. So I'm happy to expand that a little bit more and beef this section up if this is what the committee wants. It would still, yes, it would be consistent with the comprehensive plan to do so. I mean, the steps that I took were really trying to also, not hamstring developers that are looking to potentially cluster where it could be beneficial to the town versus your typical subdivision. So I'm happy to put some revisions into this if you'd like.
I see one thumbs up. Do I see any other thumbs up? Seems like everyone's, yeah, okay. I see some thumbs up and everyone else seems pretty neutral. So I think go for it. Jan?
Yeah, again, I'm not against it. I think maybe this is a question we ought to think about, how are we trying to just tweak these and how much are we trying to wholesale rewrite? So I do agree that there's room in the cluster code to give some more density, but I also it seems we're kind of going back and forth between, okay, we're just kind of cleaning this up to make it more efficient and to align with what we heard loud and clear in the comprehensive plan. Oh, but we really want to do this. So I'm just,
So let me just clarify. I'm not suggesting we add more density at this point. What I'm going to do is go in and add more provisions that will provide a little bit more of, determination of like your natural resources, some of the conservation, some of the actual process itself, how the process is required in order to determine a cluster, or some of the findings maybe the planning board needs to make. So those
Great.
kind of things that we can
Thanks for
start
clarifying
there.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and then if for some reason there is a discussion of increasing density at some point, we can deal with it at that point. But in all reality, this cluster subdivision, this cluster development, these regulations were already very strict because they were already requiring you had to have 35,000 square feet of buildable area in order to even cluster. And that sometimes could actually hinder your ability to actually preserve some of the natural features, especially in some of your remaining developable lands.
Darlene?
Mhm.
I had the same concern as Jan, and it seems to have been answered. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, great. Yeah, I think we still are erring on the side of tweaks and administrative changes as opposed to wholesale changes. But there's enough topics here that we are coming across some things that need more tweaking than others, more elaboration than others, I guess. Okay, so the next document, exterior lighting. Okay, and when we go for exterior lighting and landscaping, I just first want to say, looking through all the comments, like there definitely were mostly neutral. Nobody seemed like really excited about, yes, we definitely need all these exterior lightings and we definitely need all these landscaping. There were some folks that felt like maybe it was overstepping too much. I'm wondering if, just put this idea in everybody's head, we can talk about it a little bit. There might be some room here to take the best practices that Valerie's laid out here and use them like as recommendations instead of actually regulations as a starting point. But with that being said, we can dive into exterior lighting, and I wanted to highlight the goal and objective this is related to. taking a second to load.
Right, so you have a couple different options, and Katie's correct. I mean, you could even make these as like guidelines and have like an appendix to in your code that specifically just says all site plans and should follow like the lighting guidelines, exterior lighting guidelines. So it's really, it's flexible on how you'd like to, if you want to keep certain components of this and then others, then that's also fine too. So I'll leave it.
So there, I just highlighted the goals and objectives this is related to. And Valerie was saying the reason why it looks like the way it does right now is because it was aligning with the International Dark Sky Association dark sky lighting standards, which, as you can imagine, are very restrictive. So yeah, I think everybody acknowledges that there definitely are a lot of complaints that are happening about lighting disturbances. It's just this is definitely like a policy question, I guess, in a nutshell, policy question. Does anybody have any just general comments on that before we dive into the actual document? I can't see.
Yeah, so let me just, I know compared to many other towns, our lighting guidelines and or laws are lacking. And I think on the planning board, when we look at site plans, I think it would be helpful to have a better ability other than, well, it's kind of the right thing to do to talk to the applicants about. So I think having some framework that we can use to look at their lighting and their lighting proposals would be very, very helpful. So you were sort of, people weren't enthusiastic about this. I think it's really important to add more information about what the expectations are in terms of lighting for the applicants.
And do you have a strong preference in terms of whether those are the must comply versus these are the best practices that we're using as guidelines? I'm going to let other people.
I mean, I'll defer a little bit maybe to Judd, but it's helpful to me if we can say, look, this is what you should do. This is what the code says. We do have some cases where it's a suggestion, but I sort of, we are so far behind what other towns have that to lean towards saying, let's look at putting in regulations. But again, I'll listen to what other people say.
Okay, Andrea, I think you were next.
So, I mean, first of all, the recommendations are going from, oh, wait, it disappeared.
Oh, sorry.
Going from a provision that was one paragraph to several pages worth of regulation. So that in and of itself, that's a lot. I think we really need to stick to language that's more recommendations than mandatory. I think that the original paragraph hits on what the most important aspect of this type of regulation is, which is lighting that doesn't interfere with your neighbor's ability to enjoy their property and their peace and quiet, right? I mean, that's what we're really trying to do. We want to have neighbors living in, peaceful terms with one another. And the most important thing is that lights aren't installed where they interfere with their neighbors' quiet and peaceful enjoyment of their own property. When we get into this type of regulation, as of right now, at this time, the cost of putting in the lighting, some of the lighting that's that's here now may be cost prohibitive to some still. We have to be very careful that we don't put regulations in place that only the very people that have the most are the only ones that afford to be able to do what they want to do with their property. We want to be able to make sure that what people want to do with their property is in equal reach of each individual applicant. I think Mary Shaw raised, a point that some people count on the outdoor lighting for security reasons. But again, we don't want spotlights shining in our bedroom window at night every time a deer walks by the window. I mean, there's like some common sense things. So I think we really need to steer away from a lot of mandatory language and steer more towards language that's more like recommendations and guidance. And there are a few points in here that I think are important that we can say, but when we're talking about lighting around the pool or making sure that people have their lights off by a certain time. I mean, it's unless that you have lighting directly interfering with the neighbor, you're going to tell somebody that they can't go for a midnight swim because they can't turn their lights on. I mean, I'm over exaggerating, but I think you get my point. So that's where my concern is here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. John? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think that we need some kind of reasonable regulations, and I don't think that to be pages and pages, but I see from time to time, and I hear one of the biggest disputes among neighbors is the fact that their lights are shining in their window, and and they have a reason for security and this and that, and you can come up with all kinds of reasons, but so. And when it's a suggestion, it's unenforceable. So,
Good. Since why doesn't everyone go through the regulations and highlight the portions that you are most concerned with that you feel are very restrictive? That would be helpful to me. Because we're talking about, there's mention about timing, but I don't see anything in here about, I don't recall putting anything in about hours, so I just think, I mean, maybe not, we don't have to go through it all this evening, but maybe everyone can go through and say, this particular thing I find very problematic, right? Because we might find that when you actually read through it, it's less problematic than you think. It just looks more voluminous because it is compared to what you have. But I think to some extent, and I'm not saying, we very well could just end up not moving forward with this, but there are certain things that the town likes to be very clear on its direction. So there is a section. So some of these sections, refer to the exemptions. Some of them refers to the purpose of the chapter, right? So the actual crux of the standards themselves, is only like about 2 pages. And I think maybe it would be good if everyone just can take a look at them and tell me what you find that is burdensome to an applicant that's seeking site plan approval.
Charlene?
Yeah, I think that if you use language that, that's reasonable, that doesn't interfere and have no regulations, it's sort of too subjective to have anything done. I think you need some framework in order to develop what kind of lighting is appropriate and what kind of lighting is not appropriate. Because just to say, well, you want appropriate lighting, what does that mean? So,
Jan?
I'd recommend that you have some provisions for the non-residential uses and commercial zoning districts that are a little bit more, I don't want to say restrictive, but specific standards for commercial lighting that are industry standards. And then maybe, don't go crazy with the residential. But I see driving around town a lot of, from my perspective, some objectionable lighting and glare that probably could be better handled. And that's because we don't have any regulations, and it's overlit. And when you're by nearby residential properties, I think those folks have a right to have a legitimate gripe against it.
That's helpful. Andrea, did you have something else? Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, I think we can take another look back at this and sort of hone in on which parts are crossing the line and which parts aren't, and just get some more specific feedback on it. Because yeah, right now that the feedback was a little bit more general. Anything else on that before?
Yeah, and just as a note, like again, take a look at this because if we need to, but it really refers to site plan, special permits, or subdivision applications as opposed to you having your single family residential.
Oh yeah, can you clarify that a little bit?
So if you
So-
scroll down,
Yeah, we
Go
want to make
down-
sure we're talking about
go
it.
down go down to B, applicability.
Which one?
B, yeah.
Here. Oh, okay, this is helpful.
So, all outdoor lighting on structures which is replaced, modified, refurbished, or installed after the effective date of the zoning chapter shall be minimum, blah, blah, blah. And it says additions, improvements, alterations, additions to new fixtures, all outdoor lighting, light and otherwise. An effective date shall apply. And then it goes right down to lighting plan. As part of any site plan, special permit, or subdivision plan, the planning board may require submission of a lighting plan and supporting data. In addition to the building inspector and their sole discretion may refer an applicant for any work involving outdoor lighting fixtures governed by this section to the planning board for site plan approval with respect to said lighting. And then the rest of it is all the lighting standards associated with like the lighting plan. So I can make that a little bit more clear that this is really referring to applications for site plan, special permit, or subdivision approval, and not necessarily, your single family homes.
So the case of, someone's light shining in another home's window is covered elsewhere and,
Well, we can specifically then add something that, but I think we can talk about like overall encroachment onto a neighboring property for
There's
residential
no-
districts.
There's no lighting ordinance in the town? I thought maybe there was.
I thought there
Nothing.
there's nothing.
No, there was something at the
It's
top.
at the
There was a
very top.
paragraph
Right, but it's,
that was deleted in,
This is
it
what
was
we-
in general,
This is what we have now.
right?
So when is
Okay.
this applicable?
it's just not, right now, it says all lighting in connection with all structures and uses shall be directed away from nearby streets and properties and shall not cause an objectionable glare. Right, so what we can do is we can specifically make note that this isn't specifically for residential properties in terms of like all the specific standards, but we could put in very simple standards for residential properties that, that the encroachment onto neighboring properties needs to be limited to, and a lot of times it's usually 0-foot candles by the property boundaries.
Okay, let me just make sure I'm understanding. So the current code as it exists is just really general and applies to all lighting in all districts, all types of properties. But what you're proposing is specific to what?
Is going to be specific to site plan, subdivision, and special permit applications. Like this is where you really need your, yes, could there potentially be a neighbor that has like a spotlight that's, onto a neighboring property? Yes, but for the most part, the biggest issue with light glare and lighting is with your non-residential districts, as Jan noted.
Yeah,
Right.
but I think we need something for the residential because it is an issue.
Right, so I can add in a very small section that just basically says you just don't want encroachment onto your neighboring property.
It's somewhat picked up in the current 2214, in just the general direction that all lighting would be directed away from nearby streets and properties, shall not cause objectionable glare.
And then it's specific and non-residential. That's when it gets a little bit more specific.
Right, yeah.
Right, so I could keep the first two, but if you want to have something generalized like that, and then have for the specifics in terms of the site plan, subdivision, and special permit applications.
Charlene, and then Jan. You're on mute, Charlene.
commercial entities in residential areas, would that be covered as a commercial or as a residential? And should there be stricter provisions for a commercial entity in a residential zone?
Well, if that commercial entity, does it have a site plan approval, or is it just something that's non-conforming that has been there forever?
There are both. I know if it's a site plan, then it would be covered, but if it's non-conforming, I guess with any change, regardless of whether they go to
Site
the
plan,
planning
right.
board,
Right.
would need a, would have to go by the regulations.
Right, but if we, as Judd noted, if we have the first couple just in the zoning regulations to begin with,
Yeah,
that
maybe they
would cover
apply
it.
to all properties, not
Right.
residential or commercial, just to
That's
everybody.
correct.
Those two. Yeah.
Okay, Jan?
Yeah, I think that covers part of what I was going to say is that we certainly, again, on the lakes, there are people that have spotlights that are intended to light up the lakes, but they go all the way across and hit the, they go into the houses across the lake. So I think if you say all properties, because again, what's a lake? Is it a residential property? Nobody knows who owns it. So I think if you make it more general that you should retain it to your own property line, in all cases, whether it's residential or commercial or
Yeah, I
a
think that's
lake,
covered under.
that would help. So I like that suggestion.
Okay, all right. So the first, Valerie will do some cleanup and then we'll all look at it again. That sounds like the order of
I think it's
operations.
right, and it's a simple fix. So.
Okay. And then I think probably the conversation is mirrored here for landscaping. Let me just show. There was one very specific objective that was related to this too, but the second one, we're promoting pollinator friendly, native and pollinator friendly landscaping, was very specific, and that particular idea got pretty broad support from the people who commented on the document. But I think question for you, Valerie, when does this apply in commercial versus residential?
No, this is just for, this is requiring, so your landscaping, the A1 is already part of your requirements.
Mhm.
A2, I added yards shall be landscaped and maintained in a manner consistent with the general character of the neighborhood in which the property is situated, because a lot of people had concerns with property maintenance. And landscape treatment shall minimize soil erosion runoff and provide necessary screenings. And then B specifically talks about landscape plans that are in conjunction with any site plan or special use permit application.
So 2 does apply to residential? Or
apply to resident, to A1 and A2 apply to like everywhere.
okay.
B is a landscape plan with special site plan or special use permit applications.
Okay,
only.
that's helpful. That's helpful. Thank you.
Can someone just give me an example of a landscape plan that is in conjunction with a special use permit or a
You
site
have a
plan?
You have a special use permits for, I believe, like, for example, like, some of your farms, right? If somebody was going to put together like a new barn or something like that, you might want to see a landscaping plan as part of that special use permit, depending upon, especially if it refers to certain criteria in your zoning.
Yeah, any of the commercial
Right.
projects, Andrew, like Wilder Bolter, they had a site-specific landscaping plan. Oro Cafe had a landscaping plan. Now, most of the, the commercial projects that come before the planning board, there's typically a landscaping component.
What if a site plan for a simple project like a patio or a deck Is that, would
Yeah,
that
they
work?
don't,
Maybe?
they don't come before the planning board,
Okay,
Mhm.
got it. So the
typically,
answer-
unless it's a
Right.
multifamily, and if it's like a wetland permit or something, then there's not a landscape, there might be a wetland mitigation plan, but that's something for those small projects, so.
Okay, that's helpful. You had your hand raised, Jan. Did you have
Yeah,
something?
just on A2, the word yards, is that like the entire yard or is that the zoning setback yard and is
I was just, yeah, I mean, I think I was assuming entire yards, just general
Yeah.
property maintenance. I mean, we can
Okay.
always, if people
so
find that.
if yard might be a defined term and it might mean something
Right.
different. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just say it called properties shall
Yeah,
be
yeah,
landscaped and maintained.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Andrea, I think you had your hand raised first.
I mean, when I read that, landscapes and maintain in a manner consistent with the general character of the neighborhood. Who decides what the general character of the neighborhood is? Some
We
people like to, they like everything free grown, meadow-like. Some people like completely landscaped, manicured, short lawns that look like they could be a football field. I mean, who decides? And if you don't like your neighbor's landscaping and you think it's not consistent with your neighborhood, who decides?
That's fine. We can remove it. It's really not, it's not really even that important to the code. The more important piece is the landscaping standards. So that's really, we can remove that section.
Let's hear other comments. Dan?
Yeah, I agree with that comment. And then I'm also wondering if I'm a little bit, lost in terms of like the question was raised with the lighting. Does this apply only to, new planning board cases, or, do we have the same requirements of people in general that, the building inspector will go and enforce, or how do I understand this?
This is only for current, for new site plan or special use permit application.
So how do we know that from, because
Because it says landscaping standards, a landscaping plan shall be submitted in conjunction with any site plan or special use permit application.
okay,
And it says the following standards shall be met, and that's when it lists all the standards.
okay.
Maybe we could somehow make that more clear.
Sure. I can maybe change it instead of landscaping standards, call it landscaping plan required.
Yeah, I mean, that's in, I'm seeing that in B,
Right.
right? So maybe, like you were talking about doing in some of the others, that something like that maybe moves up to the front for just to get the applicability, clear right from the start.
Okay.
Dan?
Yeah, so I agree with taking the first sentence out of A2, but I sort of like the second sentence. Minimize soil erosion, stormwater runoff, and provide necessary screening. So I think that's a good help. So that could either be, added up to the end of one, but I think that's important to keep in there.
Isn't that already picked up in one, Jan?
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
you're right. So two, okay, then in that case, two can go.
Yeah.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you, Jed.
Jan?
Also, just to note that you always have the New York State property maintenance code. So if you have a yard that is really, offensive to people in the neighborhood, the building inspector can always pursue, getting that cleaned up through the property maintenance code in New York.
Okay, so I think we have some good, Valerie can make some changes, and then same as the exterior lighting, once Valerie makes the changes, if we can take a microscope to it and just highlight if there's anything left that feels like it's too onerous. Good?
Okay.
Okay. Any lingering comments on that? Okay. So now I just want to check in with everybody again. We have site development left, but do we want to? You want to just go for that and then let Valerie ask her other questions at the end? Okay, I have to admit I'm rather embarrassed because I always like to keep my meetings on time, and this meeting is just beyond. Well, I guess technically we're only 18 minutes over schedule right now. All right, I'm gonna cut myself some slack on that.
Good.
There's just too much stuff to get through.
Yeah.
Okay, site development.
I don't think there was a lot of comments on this
There
one.
weren't. There were not.
Yay.
We're not. We're almost done.
Right. So you can scroll down. And this was just really cleaning up. This wasn't really doing any major wholesale changes. I think, Judd, I'm probably gonna have you take a look at this. Just to make sure you're comfortable with some of the suggestions that we had. I think I'm not when you start changing, like Jan, you had some questions about, do we change, like, do we want to exempt decks, solar panels? I mean, these are all things that the town has to decide, but they're all policy decisions, I think. But
Mhm.
If you could go back up to the top there, I think Jan had a really good suggestion there where I was worried about lots located in non-residential districts. I think if it was changed to,
uses, that's fine.
yeah, it's changed to lots with non-residential uses would take care of a lot of that concern for me, because we do have commercial entities in residential districts that I, I think this would help.
Mhm.
My only comment on the other about solar panels and equipment pads. Under A, it says no building permit can be issued basically in all zones other than for single family and two family. So the planning board has seen a bunch of applications in some of the condominium developments for very simple projects, but they require building permits. So then they need site plan approval. And we've been getting them through the process very quickly, but I'm not sure how the board feels about continuing to see them and if there's an opportunity to eliminate that. You know, it's a policy decision, obviously, but it would be a good, just something to consider. Sort of see some very benign applications that are coming before the board just because of the terminology in A.
I would certainly support that. The people adding a deck, just because they're in a townhouse as opposed to
Multifamily, right? Yeah.
have to come in to the board and we don't, to be honest, all we do is
I would just approve them.
very quick, look to make sure it complies. Nothing that couldn't be done without coming to us. The building inspector would make sure it complies with meets
Sure.
and bounds, the setbacks. It's
That-
really minimal.
All right,
Saw
so
a
we'll
lot
add
of
that.
moving heads. Yeah. Okay. Good. And then I think we all are in favor of adding in provisions for stuff to be submitted
Yes, I
electronically.
can
for
do that.
sure.
Somewhere in here, there's a provision that plans have to be submitted on Mylar. And I don't know how
I can remove
Jenna
that
feels about
too.
this, but it is that's a very outdated practice.
Yeah.
It's very expensive to produce.
Let's get rid of that.
Yeah.
Would everybody be okay about adding language in E that's repeated in F about extending time by mutual consent? Okay, good.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask about Mylars. Most towns, I understand, have done away with them, right? Or are
Yeah, there's a couple outliers like North Salem. But I think you and North Salem might be the only two that are left.
oh, but it's fun to go in and sign them. No, I get it.
You can sign paper copies, that's okay.
Oh, all right.
Okay, this I think is a good administrative thing. Jen, this sounds like it would. Can you just walk us through that?
I think this is the same thing as the performance bond issue.
Exactly.
Right,
Exactly.
so I'll deal with
Okay.
Judd on that.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you. More electronic stuff.
Yeah,
Does anybody have a problem with that? At impervious areas, for example, buildings, parking. Are you okay with that?
All right, so this is, I'm happy to add this, but I don't know how often you have, that's for special permits specifically related to, horse farms.
Yeah, we get them.
So, if you want a business plan, we can add that. It's not a problem.
What did you say, Jan? You said that's applicable.
We see them quite often, and we ask for this information.
Okay,
Anyway.
so then I'll add it then.
Rose's question, is that the same stipulation for private owners?
No, this would
Totally
be
fair
a
horse.
riding academy,
Right,
Got
not
it.
your private horses. Yeah.
right.
Okay, I think we can
Right.
change the,
And what I'll do is I'm gonna reach out to Kirsten just to make sure that whatever we put in here conforms with what the practice that's already being undertaken.
excellent, very good.
Regarding
Yeah,
the
but-
number of copies, maybe it could just be as determined by the planning administrator, because
Right,
it's one of those things that are constantly changing depending on who's on the board and who wants hard copies and who wants digital.
exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So as long as it's, as determined by the planning board administrator, that works for us.
Okay,
This one,
yes, we can do that. I mean, since it seems like we're moving forward with both those. Yes.
okay. Oh, okay, so the language around development shall include energy efficient materials and elements as practicable as possible. Okay, so Andrea, that language, you feel that language is too restrictive. What's kind of standard here in other towns? That's what I'm wondering. In terms
Well, I mean,
of
I think,
language used.
well, I put that in there because specifically the comprehensive plan wanted to encourage or to try to push projects more energy efficient.
Mhm.
And since this again is going back to site plans, which really for the most part, you don't require, I mean, I work in some communities where they require a site plan for 300 cubic feet of, of soil disturbance. So I'm just saying, so you don't really require a lot of site plan approval. So I think what you're gonna find is that a lot of the applications that we're referring to here are your larger projects. So it's not
And I think
necessarily
there's a
gonna
lot of
be,
wiggle room with that,
Right.
as practicable as possible. If somebody said, I'm trying to build,
Yeah.
for example, affordable housing, and I can't put in this stuff, it won't close the equation, then it's not practical. So I think that gives us the wiggle room.
Is there
Well,
some
that
way
we
to
would need.
encourage it without using the word shall? Is there
Well,
some way
there-
to
there-
encourage it or incentivize, without making it mandatory? I guess that was my point.
well, the other thing is,
Mandatory though.
this is really something that we tried to capture in the energy code, and wasn't passed, but that's where it most naturally would fit, is to specify the energy code there rather than just an open-ended statement here, I think.
I see what it says shall, but then it does say as practicable as possible. So kind of got a little both. I don't know. Valerie, what do you think?
them a little bit different. I don't know if we want to refer to the energy code though, because if you refer to the energy code, that's a different type of requirement than just having certain elements, so that the applicant can say, I'm putting, these certain energy conservation measures within, as opposed, because they're building the New York Energy Stretch, like the Energy Stretch code, that also deals very much with like certain electrical, certain like window ratings, maybe they were going to propose something different like solar panels.
I think this is less intrusive. I mean, it's like we want it, but if it's not practicable, you don't have to do it. And if you go the other way, then it is mandated. You're correct.
Yeah, I mean, I just followed the shall because you have a few others above that say development shall, but
Yeah,
I
and
can,
that-
I can tweak that.
But then you cut it off with as practicable, so
Right.
that's fine.
Okay, I think
Yeah, I'm okay with it as it is, because I know as we actually implement it, that gives us, I think, all the wiggle room we need.
okay. The next comment for discussion. So lots of comments agreed looking at this here, that Jan suggested adding backup generators. Everyone agrees those are necessary, noisy, whatever, but they're, can't live without them kind of. I guess my question here on this one is, this seems to be about lighting specifically, but then the discussion in the comments kind of got into like noise too. So I think they're two separate topics.
Yeah, don't these all fall under other places of the code too, as various types of nuisances or requirements? I mean, did you have to lean on the lighting code and the the nuisance noise codes and things?
Do we have a nuisance noise code?
If you have a noise code, you don't have a nuisance you don't have a general nuisance provision in the code, but there is a noise chapter.
Okay.
It's not
Shandy?
like we have neighbors up in arms over their neighbors putting in air conditioning units near their property line and causing turmoil. Do we, Duff? I heard Wednesday night's meeting had some air conditioning unit.
Yeah, I heard the same.
Oh
Oh,
my, but
Interesting. So we didn't really come to any conclusions in the comments here.
I can look to tweak it.
Yeah, why don't you look at that and just see if there's any takeaway. Then here, okay. I know we've mentioned this in different contexts before. How do people feel about adding a provision for considering future sidewalk areas as is appropriate for the site? Would people be okay with that, adding that?
Yep.
Absolutely consistent with town policy, so yeah.
Okay. All right, then I think the rest of them are admin. I think, yep. Are Judd and Jan okay with this one?
This is another
Bond.
Bond?
performance
Yeah.
bonds kind of thing.
Oh, okay. Got it. So,
Yeah.
okay, then that's the end of that document. Any general thoughts or feelings about that one? Okay, I think we covered everything. Thank you so much, everybody. So Valerie, I'll just turn it over to you for I know you wanted to ask the group some questions and kind of take our temperature on.
I know it's late, so I have 3 questions that I need to ask very quickly. And if this is something that beyond we can discuss quickly, then I can talk to Katie about trying to figure out how best to get people to weigh in. But the next round is going to look at potentially solar and battery energy storage. And the question that I have is, I know you already allow for solar panels, but is the town interested in allowing for like solar arrays to be established? And if yes, then this would also include battery energy storage systems. If no, would you be open to at least allowing those systems? And when I say no, in terms of like if there were already green land, green fields or like forested areas, whether you don't want to even consider that, we could look at potentially allowing them on already paved surfaces, right? Or new parking lots or other paved surfaces. like in terms of like a parking lot canopy, a solar canopy. So I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that, or if the town would like to just keep things as you have it.
Are you
Sorry.
talking commercial scale or residential?
Residential
Well,
is allowed.
you know, if you're doing a parking lot, you might be considering like a shopping center or something, which is what everybody says, you know, in Westchester, we have fewer and fewer options in terms of where we can put our solar stuff, and parking lots seem to come up all the time as the biggest opportunity. We've got a lot of pavement. And that typically could be, you know, that'll be a, you know, call it commercial scale, but it's bigger than residential.
So when you say arrays, you mean like panels that are sticking up out of the ground? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, we had an issue that came up, and Dan obviously is aware that we were lucky enough to receive a grant to do some work at Onatru, and it went through different iterations and ultimately ended up at one where they wanted to put up one of these carport structures at Onatru. And it got a lot of pushback from the garden club and people who use Onatru. It's a historical site. There's no paved areas. And basically people are not, seem to be, I'm not going to make a blank statement. It seemed to be the feedback that we were getting from the community is that they really weren't into additional structures in spaces throughout the town, that they were more open to, you know, using already existing structures to put solar on and encourage that. Now I understand what Dan is saying, that, you know, something like one of the shopping centers, say, you know, in Cross River or Golden's Bridge, I think we would still get the same kind of pushback for a car canopy there. And we may want to look to encouraging things like on the roof of the shopping center, someplace where there's less visual impact.
I mean, I think you already, I'll double check your zoning to make sure that it does allow for that and there's no obstacles. And at this point, I'll hold off on developing those two local laws.
We can
Dan,
make that a separate, it sounds like there'll be, you know, considerable back and forth on that. And
Yes.
there's lots of different references we can take from Westchester County and what different municipalities have done. And we can take our time and go through that as a separate exercise, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, while we have Valerie, I would like to see what would be recommended. And maybe I didn't interpret what was happening at Onatru correctly. I thought the concern was more of the historical context of that particular property. And, you know, thought people were even saying, why don't you do this at Town Park instead of at Onatru? So I didn't think the problem was as much the concept as the location. So I'd like to see what kind of guidelines might be possible to put one of these in place. I know that at one point, the old tennis courts at the top of Town Park had been considered as a site for putting a bunch of solar panels up. And, you know, I'd actually, if I'm thinking about it, would rather have a place to have a shady car or put it over the top of the pavilions, one of the, you know, the big pavilions there, put it on that. So I'd love to see suggested language that then would give us something more concrete to talk about, rather than, yeah, I'm in favor, no, I'm not in favor. I'd like to see that. I also don't have any, you talked about battery storage. I don't have any concept of what that really means. How big, how, you know, is it that you need to build, you know, big tower lines coming into it in order to make it viable, or can it really happen? So I'd like to, I think I'd like to explore that and see if it could be done in at least a moderate way.
You know, I think that's the business that that Mark's in, so maybe he could give us a little update.
Jan?
I'll just say that, I mean, battery storage can be independent of solar. And I'm seeing a big influx of battery storage applications in communities all over Westchester. And I'm sure we'll see them in Lewisboro. And they should be zoned for because they're not super attractive. So I think that NYSERDA has a model law, and I'm sure Valerie's aware of it. And I would suggest that you zone for it because it's going to come, and a lot of times they come as under like public utilities, and which are allowed in town. So I think you should look into that.
Go ahead,
Since, because basically I was gonna start off with the model laws for both NYSERDA and also New York State has a model solar law. So why don't I start with sending the model laws out to the group, right? So you can at least see what it is that's, and then we can, next time when we meet in December, if the group really says we really want to move forward with one or both of these, then we can talk about trying to develop that and wrap it into what goes out to the public in terms of review for potential zoning updates. And I can send you some additional stuff, background information on the battery energy storage systems.
That sounds great. Okay. What's item number 2?
The last one is the senior overlay. So we kind of floated that concept throughout the comprehensive plan process. People seemed to generally support that. Now, of course, we didn't provide any framework or standards. We just kind of floated that idea. So now we're at the point where I can develop this if the group thinks that this is something that we want to consider as part of this round of zoning edits, or if you want to defer that to the future, we can do that as well. But I wanted to get your sense at this point.
I think it's super important. I think there's a lot of public support for it.
Yeah. All right, so keep in mind,
I'm
I'm going to create the framework, but it's going to be specifically, so that we can get feedback and discussion, right? So I don't want anybody to say this is best practices, because it's not going to be best practices. I'm going to be developing something that I think might work with the town, but I'm open, clearly I need you to review, and similar to what you've done is say, why are we doing this? So I agree with this, I don't agree with that. And that's how we'll kind of unfold that particular round of draft regulations for the senior overlay.
Charlene?
Is it going to be, Valerie, is it going to be senior assisted living, long-term care, exactly what?
Well, that's what I'm going to come up with, and then you can tell me whether you agree, disagree with what I propose. Because right now it's anything in particular, and so it can be all those items if we want.
Yeah, because they have different impacts on the
That's
area.
correct.
Yeah, I'll be curious. I think we just kind of need to see it and then trial and error it. Okay, Jan?
Yeah, this is kind of a little bit with this senior overlay and a little bit not. When we've had some emergencies and had like either heat places you can go for heat, or places you can go for cooling centers, heating centers. We've been some of the people who have come have been elderly who really need a lot of help. So if there's a way and as a typical, if you can think of, okay, we're giving give the library as the cooling center, and somebody shows up who's in need of a medical attention. I don't know if there's any way to sort of build that concept into a senior overlay. Have no idea what I'm talking about, but I just wanted to add that as a concern that I think is certainly been expressed in the town, that we need to care for our seniors in emergencies, especially, and we don't have any kind of of, I don't even know whether that means we need to call on, medical emergency people at the ambulance corps and say, we need somebody here with a blood pressure cuff or something. I have no idea what it means, but I know that's a problem. So if that is at all encompassed by a overlay zone, senior overlay zone, it is a problem.
So this would be for private development, right? So it wouldn't be something that the town would be running themselves. The town could develop, they can coordinate with any of your emergency services to do something like that during those types of events.
Were there any other special topics, or those were the two things you needed input on?
That was it.
Okay. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of the schedule. Oh, that is the wrong thing to share. Our next, so we've got another batch of items coming the first week of December. Then we have our next meeting on 12/14. Maybe we should look at starting at 7. That way we can go later and not eat into everyone's bedtime. And then we have a separate steering committee for some of this group, most of this group, on the 18th, where we'll be reviewing the draft comprehensive plan, which will also be hitting inboxes. But then for the town board, we will be passing the documents for review, the plan and the zoning code for you, and then you'll have your own opportunity to discuss with MPV on January 8th. So I think, why don't we send out all this? Why don't we aim for that schedule? Valerie will send out the next batch of stuff and the draft comprehensive plan. If you receive it and you look at it and you're looking at the deadline, like there's no way I can get through all of this before the 14th, just let me know. We can look at pushing things. But I think proceeding at the pace we're going has been really helpful, because we've got the momentum, everybody's involved. I think, like with the town board, next time we send out the request for feedback, everyone will pay attention to it now, because they went through this. They're all paying attention now, it seems like. I could be imagining that, Andrea and Dan. What do you think? I think you got their attention, which is good, which is really good. We appreciate the feedback. It's just going to help streamline things. So let's proceed apace, but please don't hesitate. Just shoot me an email if you're like, oh, this deadline's not going to work for me. And then we'll see how everyone's feeling. Does that sound good?
Good.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody. The tons of brain power right here in this meeting, and I really appreciate all the different, expertise from all the different corners coming together to make this as seamless as possible. Thank you. And we're going to post this on YouTube. Anybody who stuck it out, thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate it. And everybody just keep your eyes on email. And that's our best way to communicate between meetings. So with that, I motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great night.
And a good Thanksgiving to everybody
And a
too.
good thing.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.